dreamt I met the night sky in my lover's arms and gasped. The space between stars was so vast that black swallowed my glance. So cold it crackled in my skin, numb to arms around me. Then she whispered with a voice, warm liquid silver as the light that fell across our naked limbs, a voice that brought me close again. We should plant gardens on the moon, together, you and I. It's impossible, of course, which is why it's important that we do it.
Night. People are trying to sleep, so I have to speak softly. I have to be quiet. Of all the lives to choose, we only call some of them life. Even when we go somewhere else, be something else. It's hard as hell to shake that. And this is the bitch of it. That we can't say that we are our own creation. That we can't ultimately say that we are our own property, that we have any discrete knowledge of our own origins or natures. The points from which articles within ourselves derive, points of origin. Because we came into the story already in progress.
You roll our cultural clock back a few decades, and you have clear-cut, sharply drawn ideas about what gender meant, what gender is.
I've often felt like the voice in the night, in places like this. Often felt that I had to keep quiet.
There was the man who went to war, or who went to work, and war and work were not dissimilar. Did what they could to acquire, provide, protect. Engage in many of the material concerns and conditions of building a life for himself and for others. They were to be powerful, to lead, to make the decisions that connected their home to the rest of the world, and to act as a bulwark thereby.
Because before we were there to perceive it, concepts were already in play. Frameworks into which concepts would be placed were already constructed. Before we participated in them, language and culture were already in motion, and we are dropped into the middle of that process.
The woman was to provide in different ways, to cover the distance between a structure of wood and a home, to raise and nurture children, to support and nurture husbands, and not to go to war or to work, which are much the same thing.
There's more than a century of theological tradition in this place. There are buildings more than a century old with the name of one of my ancestors, a plaque nailed to their foundation stones and cornerstones. Tradition and legacy. Those are pretty compelling reasons to remain quiet. Which I've done with mixed success.
Men were to be intelligent, courageous, bold, strong. What emotions they felt bravely wrestled with in silence. And then, through great effort and heroic crusades, the world changed. Not overnight, inches at a time, sometimes a few leaps, and one foot rarely keeping pace with the other. And women could be fulfilled going to work and to war, in buying a house and not just building a home, in providing and protecting. They could be fulfilled by doing everything that was purported to fulfill men, and that's a good thing. But whatever happened to the housewife? Because men are fulfilled by protecting and providing, going to work and to war. Women are fulfilled by protecting, providing, going to work and to war. And fortunately, we've had enough wisdom to say that for the woman that is a choice. And because it is a choice, we have to allow the perpetuity of the possibility of not going to work, not going to war, not providing, not protecting, but instead contributing to the building of lives in different ways. To say it is liberation, we must say women have a choice. And for it to be a choice, the alternatives have to be present. And so, women can go to work or to war or not, provide, protect, or nurture, care. They can be stoic or tempestuous. They can be expressive or quiet. They can be fulfilled putting their lives into the workplace or putting their lives into homes. But not men. Men still go to work or to war. They provide and protect. Men are still stoic, more clear thinking than emotional, more rational than responsive, more contained than expressed. So where, in this world we live in now, does sensitivity fall on the spectrum? Where does vulnerability fall on the spectrum? Whether men or women, they're allowed. Deviant, but allowed. Indulgent, but permitted. Where is nurture on the spectrum? A condescending nod to a style of life considered antiquated, but quaint. One that women can indulge if they so desire. And men, perhaps, with the understanding that it is temporary, that that's not who they are, and God forbid, not what they want to be. Just an allowance that we'll make because times are tough and it's so very hard for him to be somewhere he doesn't want to be, unless perhaps he does. So where is sensitivity and nurture? The aspects of femininity that didn't survive the revolution became something of a political liability. Has the human condition changed so much that which was provided for no longer needs provision? Have we changed so much that people found such things fulfilling no longer exist? Are the choices really there? Can you tell your in-laws that the husband is the homemaker and the wife is the breadwinner without a shudder of dread? When a woman desires to stay at home and provide for family and household, they call her a traditionalist. When a man desires to stay home and provide, nurture, support, they call him lazy.
Sometimes my keeping quiet was so loud that others found it deafening. And even when I tried, as best as I knew how, which was hardly at all, to remain just another voice of no particular volume, focus, or import. I left impressions. It's one of the interesting things about living in an era when someone can, half a continent away, reach across 20 years, but you haven't seen each other. They can convey to you impressions.
find out what you missed the first time around.
And it's only after we have already been participating in it that we begin to be aware of our participation. That there is no aspect of ourselves that we can say is entirely ours. But on the other side of it, we can't say that it is entirely consequential either.
And in love, men woo and pursue and advertise their quality as men, in the qualities of men. And women slavishly reshape themselves as objects to be pursued, advertise their qualities as women, in the qualities of women. Men are to desire and women are to desire to be desired. Men are to be capable and women are to be beautiful. Or so the story went. And it needed to change. The story needed to change. But in the church, religious communities, gatherings of faith, quiet, not silent, but quiet. That my voice be more constructive than disruptive. More inspiring than distracting. More supportive than attention-seeking. And no less so in other communities. There's a threshold of tolerance, a range of radicalism that people will entertain. And when you want some part of your message to be heard, it feels very important to stay within those bounds. At least it has for me. And it's still an uphill struggle. The feet do not keep pace with each other. Magazines at the grocery store still proudly advertise the necessity of a woman maintaining her desirability, even at great cost to herself, her health, physical and psychological, even if she is professionally fulfilled, because the feet don't keep pace with each other. And men are supposed to chase. Men are supposed to win the hearts of the women they pursue. And in tryst, women are supposed to lie, wait, present themselves as available to capture by their chosen man's desires. Or so the story went, and the story needed to change. But whatever happened to the romantic paragon, the woman whose role in the dance of romance, of courtship, of wooing, was to be desirable, to be beautiful? And because there need to be choices, for us to say it's a choice, it still exists for women.
We can't say that the shape, cut, or color of self is entirely inherited, because everywhere we are making choices. We are presented with options, or more truly, select from attributes present within the field in order to construct options. The ability and facility with which we do so being incredibly variable.
And in the consummation, we've come perhaps a bit further. The desires of men can devour the woman. The desires of woman can devour the man. Men devour or nurture each other, but mostly devour, with reciprocal expectation that when it is men who meet in bed, they both meet as men, with some of the expectations of men and the attributes of how men desire, or how the story says they do. And of all the places to not be a man, when a man is what you should be, that is, perhaps, the most quietly unforgivable, the one least eased by understanding that to call them choices, there need to be choices. That to say that there are different sorts of people, we must allow them to be different,
even if it means neglecting the bulk of the message. But better, or so the rationale goes. Better to deliver 10 words and have them actually be heard, than the full 100 and having them missed. But I can't help but wonder what that measure of self-censorship does. If what is worth saying is always held within the bounds of what one believes will be heard, can be tolerated, which is as much contingent on one's valuation of what can be heard as it is the value of what one wishes to say. Nothing circumscribes or liberates the choices that we make as much, in as profound a degree, as the ways in which we perceive choice, perceive the choices that are available, the selections that are possible.
least of all there. And then the story goes on, that the consummation, the act of sex, for men is gratification unto itself. It is the moment of desire, and desire's fulfillment. And that for women, it would be the bridge, a gate to intimacy. And that is the moment desired. And that is when desire is fulfilled, in every step along the way, being pursued and being beautiful, nurture and care, the meal quietly and perfectly prepared, in the house, turned to a home by 1,000 small and subtle attentions.
On the methodical, intricate, unpredictable ping and click of events ricocheting off each other, we impose some character of selection, and in so doing self-define. As we select, we are expressing a knowledge of, a desire to be, a relationship with, a self that makes those selections. That if we choose a thing, we are imprinting upon ourselves a version of ourselves that makes that choice, that has made those selections, and may make those selections in the future. I'm reminded of the process of going back over poetry that I wrote 15 years ago, that at the time I thought was rubbish, and discovering that 15 years ago I was a much better poet than I was a critic. My ability to use language to create evocative image, to create moods, moments, places where all of those happened, is far better developed than the ability to evaluate those efforts. And I can't help but wonder if the same applies elsewhere.
things. Daphne, the quiet, golden bliss of husband's body next to theirs. The knowledge that the man is theirs, and everything that man should be. For so the story goes, and so the story tells. A provider and protector, capable and strong. And the story needed to change. And so that person now could be a man or a woman. With a woman or because there the story needs to change.
As we imprint choice on our identities, express identity through our choices, as that restructures us, restructures events around us, as we add that perhaps tiny but still measurable and still significant vector of force in those selections, as we add those to the events that unfold around us, so too do we imprint ourselves on culture and language through our participation in it. When we speak, we are expressing some notions of how speaking occurs, how we desire speaking to occur. Over time, language adapts, conforms, erodes by the accumulation of those choices. Those choices most frequently made, those concepts most frequently expressed, those needs most commonly urgent, are reflected in the structure of language. I'm in the crowd, and it's in me, on me, through me. Today I'm letting it seep past the filters, allowing myself to feel it. The wants, needs, spikes of anger and loathing, sorrows soft as unstrung violins, satisfactions like warm honey, ice cream, mint, all of it. But I feel more like Michelangelo staring at the block of marble that he believes contains a complete sculpture, a completed sculpture, and that his task is to not screw it up in the process of freeing it from the unfinished block. I feel more like that than I do like Vermeer, with his remarkable and not undeserved pride, his ability to work such images over canvas with so little paint. Language and common shared sets of symbols, of concepts, of correlations between, not just the objects, but the methods that connect the objects, reflects the most common ways in which those things are used. Language, conceptualization, culturization, necessarily over time, conforms to the most common means and methods of engagement with it, in much the same way that foot traffic over time will wear away the grass and leave a trail of packed earth.
But even so, whether the message, whether the ideas are mine, or whether I am a messenger, an observer of concepts that are environmentally present. Either way, that, whatever that is to be held in evaluatory balance with how I see the tolerances and acceptance of other persons, what they are willing to hear, or what I think they are willing to hear.
Culturally, linguistically, conceptually, there is such a thing as...
And beside the inward emotions, the flutter of eyes, seeing and not responses sight evokes, provoking the unseen. Oh children, hipster children,
scenester shag and box jean children, most of you will choose to live as your parents do when the pressure's on. It can be difficult to define in specific terms, but perhaps most aptly described by subjective relationship with the concept. Not the concept of normal per se, as there will always be individual antinomy to the concept of normal, simply by virtue of the distance between our perception of our internal experience and our perceptions of the expressed experience of people around us, rather than focusing on individual relation with the concept of normal. Instead, we can clearer picture by talking about individual relationships with normative concepts.
If I've learned anything from my time on YouTube, I've learned that I have no idea what the range of receptivity and reactivity present in a given population is. That many of the things that I would think would be nonchalantly taken in stride would be agreed with as a matter of course, can spark some of the most vehement opposition, and that ideas that I would think would shock or offend are not commonly, but frequently accepted enthusiastically, and contrary to my expectations. So, perhaps I don't know. Perhaps I don't know what to say, or what to keep to myself.
The degree to which a language or culture that is naturally conforming to ranges of most common use and interaction with it correlates to personal comfort, individual comfort.
To call it a choice, there must be choices. Because the partner in the bed fulfilled an intimacy and going back, making the home, and back, becoming everything to be pursued. The one who yearns to be won and not to do the winning. That person can be a woman, though we may call her antiquated, but never, not really, a man.
Normal may thus be considered in terms of the degree to which an individual is satisfied with common language's ability to describe their own experience, to describe their needs, to describe the imperatives which connect their internal experience and their perception of the experiences of other persons, and the degree to which they feel those things line up. As with any spread of dynamism wherein there is a range of commonality of use, there are outliers. Always will be outliers. In terms of those persons who lie below the most common range of correlation between language and experience, those persons whose facility with language, whose relationship to nuance, to complexity, to subtlety, multiplicity and plurality of meaning. For those who are below generally accepted norms regarding that relationship with language, we have social solutions. And a culture in many ways defines itself morally by the solutions that it proposes for those persons, because the generality, the bulk of the population, is more capable, more empowered, and as such takes upon itself a greater share of responsibility for managing communication in those circumstances. But what about those persons of greater capability? What about those persons who have key components of internal experience that are not reflected in common language? Sometimes they may be artists. Sometimes they may be philosophers or thinkers. They may be poets. They may be painters. They may be none of the above. They may have no personal investment in a lifelong pursuit of clarity of expression. They may simply want to live their lives.
Irreconcilable difference will seem much less important then when you have to choose what you'll keep, what you're willing to pay for. That's why your parents did, and most of you who can, will.
And through no fault of their own, find themselves in an environment not conducive to the simple living of life. Must acquire some of the skills of the artist, some of the skills of the poet. But when we factor in the narrative nature of culture, that a culture has a narrative about itself, a narrative about the people within it, and recognize that narrative is necessarily a streamlining of events in order to give it a sense of structure, relatability, conveyability. Outliers don't only occur, they are created.
But if you can't, or run so deep in the habit of won't that they believe they can't, for them, a harrowing, dangerous path, more dangerous than you'd believe. 10 years till you'd believe the tamest of my stories, of her that was her, speaking in creaks, hinges damp and swollen rot from last night. And we're not into that. Not into that, or I'd be someone else talking samadhi and Tao and death. For the night is so long, and the food never sticks. But worth it.
In order to construct a story that is significant, meaningful, and relatable to the majority of the people within a given population, to give them culture, to be able to say that they are a culture, we create outliers by neglecting or erasing the tensions, the drives, and the experiences of those persons who fall into the margins or are pushed there.
Is an echo, a reiteration of a conviction I felt earlier. As a gesture of family solidarity, I attended church with family a few weeks back. Good people. Good people. But not my people. The contrast in internal responses was so striking that in that moment I realized the undeniability of a quietly held conviction that I have a people, that I do have a people. And if the stories are to change, we must change them for ourselves, or allow them to be changed. If to change them in the world, first change them in ourselves. Spares the trouble of forming habits of endurance and survival that we hang on to long after they're necessary, long after they cease being necessary. And that can be prevented by someone saying the right thing, the thing we need to hear, which may be the thing
to say.
And you are outside. That's okay. Others are too. You'll learn to see them in the crowd. Whores, thieves, monsters, cons, magicians, pickpockets. People like you, living by illusion and guile. Because outside isn't where you are, even how you look, but how you look for what you eat, how you find it, how you eat it. You don't want to divide the world into the made and the marks, into people aware and those waiting to lose their wallets, or worse. You don't want to draw hard lines between sharks, bait, and your next meal, not when they're all people, but you will. Even if you remember that they're people, and it's so important that you do. It doesn't matter if you're kind or cruel, how your trickery is plied, whether you play the game at all, least of all that. Because the first question that matters is whether or not you can. And if you can, you will. And the only honest company you'll find is other scoundrels, not because the others lie, because they don't know how not to. They're talking truth from a different world and see nothing of yours. Whether they call you a whore, a thief, or most duplicitous of all, most dangerous of all, an artist, an actor, you'll spot others by how they move, hand, step, eye. You'll see them setting up their montes, blinds, bumps, baffles as habitual and helpless as your own setups are. They can't help it any more than you. They don't know how not to do it.
The real challenge comes in when an opportunity for an alternative engagement with the concept of culture is presented. Not alternative engagement with the culture by which they are surrounded, but a different relationship to culture. When someone is presented with the choice, perhaps decades into life, the choice between continuing to mimic cultural participation or actually experience it.
Easiest thing in the world to offer the fullness of love. Most challenging and provocative to accept the fullness of it. But even the most challenging thoughts, we can and do accept when we see ourselves in response.
You'll weave illusion, misdirection, balances and hooks into nets and snares, catch dollars, catch ideas, catch preconceptions, spear them when they're tangled. You're not quite sure which tricks harm, which truths are worse, or when those lines got so blurred, when others are so clear, but you're not alone there. Children dwell in that realm of half-knowns and half-believe in fairy tales. Which halves, the beginnings and ends, or those mysterious middles? They've yet to decide, for they are children. There may be truth to the stories of children bewitched away to fairyland. That may even be your story, my little changeling swapped timber lanes. Mine, but some of us were born here. Native or immigrant. We live less in the middle of things than between them.
When old stories wear themselves out, their narrators' voices still, and there, where you'd expect silence, you, lover and love remain.
Imprint culture in the same ways in which their choices imprint and define themselves.
We may call it deception, trickery, a cheat, to make things seem more or less than they are. And that is true. That is true. But that is also the nature of magic, of wonder, of the inspirations that bring new things into being. And lest we find ourselves cynical and calling such workings but the twiddling of thumbs to distract from the inexorable clicks of a clockwork universe. It is also the nature of knowledge and inquiry to look on a thing and see more in it and less of it than our first glance would suggest.
The moment when one realizes that one can be a participant in culture, a true participant, which involves interplay and interrelation between identity and culture. First time somebody realizes that this choice is available to them, their life changes radically.
Oh, children, those among you who hear this and know it to be true, charlatans are midwives by which the future is born. Because life cannot remain as life. It must always become something else.
Thank you.